We've got fresh faces at quarterback this week. Should you try any of them out for your DFS squad? We've also got lots of wide receiver and cornerback injuries that could open up some salary relief. We'll talk about all of that and more on the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid. I'm Austin Lee, and I'm joined by Devin Knotts, John Lee, and Ryan Hester. And during the next hour, we're going to get you ready for the Week 13 main slate on both DraftKings and FanDuel. We're going to kick it off looking at the Vegas lines, the spreads, the totals. John Lee does our Vegas value chart article over at footballguys.com. He's going to tell us what he's seeing in the Vegas landscape.
It's an interesting week this week, Austin. It's one of these weeks I warn people about every year, away favorites and how we get suckered into them every year. At the top of the bill this week, Kansas City, the Rams, and Carolina, all on the road and all favoriteds. And that we have our early week ownership projections. The running backs for those teams are first, second, and fourth in terms of percent rostered. So from that perspective, maybe a little bit of risk, but we'll dig into this a little bit later. Those particular running backs actually may not be too risky because they play large roles in the running game, those being Todd Hurley, Kareem Hunt, and Christian McCaffrey. So, but there are, however, at the lower end, Indianapolis is a road favorite, Chicago is a road favorite, Denver is a road favorite. These are guys we're going to have to talk about their running game and whether or not those running backs could be fool's gold. Back to Vegas, you got Kansas City at the top. It's the highest team total, I think, of the year at 35.5 points. At Oakland, Patrick Mahomes doing whatever he wants to do. The Rams are coming off of a bye week. They're at 32.5. Carolina at Tampa Bay approaching 30. And then we have a series of teams, Green Bay, Seattle, Houston at the top ends, all approaching 4 touchdowns. It's a pretty interesting year in 2018, watching how quickly these game totals have gone up. When I started doing the Vegas value chart a few years ago, you might have 1 or 2 teams around 28 points. Now I'm looking at it, and we've got 5 or 6 teams almost every week. And at the lower end, even at 24 points, it used to be a 1-star rating, and now basically half the teams in the league. I may have to change that in 2019. But there are a lot of high-scoring games this week, and it makes for a lot of fantasy goodness, a lot of ways to go in cash and GPP. We're going to spend the next 50 minutes talking about those options.
Yeah, and I think we're getting at the point in the season where those spreads start to get a little bit bigger. Some of these teams are experiencing some pretty big injuries, or they're sort of out of the playoff race, and they're starting to bring some of their younger guys forward and start some of these guys that need a little bit more experience now that their seasons are the team's season is kind of over. One of those teams that's bringing a QB forward is the Cincinnati Bengals. Andy Dalton has a thumb injury. He's on IR, so we're going to see Jeff Driskel this week versus Denver. It looks like Cody Kessler is going to get the start over Blake Bortles in Jacksonville. Blake Bortles is not injured. He's just bad. And it looks like Trubisky is probably going to miss another week, Mitch Trubisky, and we'll probably see Chase Daniel at the Giants like we did last week. There's a chance Sam Darnold will return this week, but keep an eye on that. It's not certain. Let's see. John, you talked to us about Vegas, so we're not going to come to you first. We're going to go to Ryan first to talk about quarterbacks. Nicely
done.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and skip cash, and I'm going to go to GPP because I'm curious what these guys have in cash because I myself am waffling. And before the show, we were talking, and Devin doesn't have his red Black Eyed Joe, so he had to make one. And I want everybody to see it. I wanted them to see it authentically, as I actually recommend Matt Ryan, who is hosting. Atlanta is hosting the Baltimore Ravens. See? There we go.
For those of you listening to the audio version, it looks like a 4-year-old doodled on a Post-it note with a crayon, but it was actually Devin who drew a little picture of a red Black-Eyed Joe. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. So anyways, this is especially on DraftKings where the pricing tends to be driven by matchup. So Matt Ryan is down at 5,600 on DraftKings, and he's playing Baltimore, who started off the year as one of the hardest defenses in the league. Right now, currently for the season, Baltimore allows the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. But in the last 5 weeks, which is a 4-game stretch for Baltimore, they're actually 18th. So they're starting to get a little bit more of a middling defense, a little bit more average. And we've talked on the show before about how, a lot of times when we're dealing with defenses in the middle on neither extreme, top or bottom, it's more about the offense than it is about the defense. And Matt Ryan's been on fire all year. The team is bad, but Matt Ryan hasn't been, especially at home. And so I think you're going to get him at a low price and a low ownership for a guy that has 300-yard potential. So again, DraftKings specific, that's a 3-point bonus. And certainly multiple touchdown upside. Another guy, it's a very similar story.
You're kind of making up stats there, but okay. Over the last 5 weeks, he's played Drew Brees, Cam Newton, Ben Roethlisberger. It's pretty easy to see why they've struggled a little bit as far as facing those 3 out of those 5 quarterbacks.
So Matt Ryan's not in that type of tier? Matt Ryan himself.
They held Drew Brees to 212-2. They held Cam Newton. Cam Newton ran for a touchdown, but they held him to 219 yards, and they held Ben Roethlisberger to 270-2. There's just not enough upside in Ryan, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it.
That's not right.
I disagree. He's a $5,600 quarterback, Devin. We talked about Ryan Fitzpatrick being a lock at $5,600 in certain weeks this year.
Ryan Fitzpatrick is
So anyways, it's not a cash game play. I think I prefaced that pretty early here, but
he's averaging 350 yards per game at home this season, 2.5 touchdowns per game. I think he has 1 game where he's under 300 yards, and maybe those defenses aren't at the caliber of Baltimore. But I talked about this in my tips and picks video earlier today. This game features two offenses that are extremely fast-paced. One is number 4 and one is number 12. There are going to be a lot of plays in this game. And Baltimore, who probably wants to run the ball here, and I suspect we'll talk about that in the next segment. Baltimore runs the second fastest offense in the league right now. There are a lot of reasons to think that Matt Ryan can go off in this game, and we've got him at 2% going into Thursday night. If he's 2%, I'll have at least 5 times over the field on that.
All right, so we've got 2 for and 1 against for those of you, keeping track here. Any other QB recommendations you got, Ryan?
Yeah, I won't belabor the point, but you can tell yourself a similar story about Andrew Luck, who's facing Jacksonville this week. He's not at home like Matt Ryan is, but Jacksonville is a team that has just almost given up on the season. So unless there's some sort of narrative that they get up for a division opponent, his price is also down, matchup driven on DraftKings. He's thrown 3 or more touchdowns in 8 straight games. So the upside's there, the hot streak is there, but the price is low. So similar story with him.
And you're going to want to keep an eye on that Jalen Ramsey injury. He's looking like he's not going to play this week. He did not practice Thursday, but that would definitely help out Andrew Luck this week. John, tell me about the quarterbacks you like this week.
Yeah, I think we'll go to cash because we haven't talked about cash yet. I want to make that clear. Everything we've talked about thus far is tournament play. In cash, I think you've got 3 options. I suspect that Devin's going to agree with me on this front, but I think you can go with either quarterback in the Carolina-Tampa Bay game, those being Cam Newton and Jameis Winston. And for various reasons, Cam does everything that you need him to do as a cash game quarterback. And Jameis is just throwing the ball everywhere at this point.
I prefer Jameis on FanDuel, but because the price is $7,500, which is far too cheap.
And for what it's worth, I'll put a plug in for Austin's what do we call it? Evaluator, correct?
Oh yeah. Marl and I work together on the Evaluator tool.
And so the Evaluator tool, for those of you who are watching who haven't used it, there are price discrepancies between DraftKings and FanDuel. You can go right to the Evaluator tool and find out where you can get those players cheaper. And a lot of times I'll just check it out just to make sure that if I want exposure to one player heavy and he's cheaper on one site, I'll just go heavy on that site and make sure I get my exposure there. So, but back to the quarterback. So you can go with either one of those guys in Tampa Bay, Carolina. And I said this in the pregame show. If you don't know what quarterback to take Patrick Mahomes. The guy is unbelievable. He's super expensive on DraftKings. I think he's the most expensive quarterback on the season, but he continues to put up numbers, gaudy numbers, and his implied team total as I led off the top of the segment, 35.3 points, 5 touchdowns. I mean, he's going to be the type of guy that you want in terms of a cash game floor each and every week throughout the rest of the season. He's almost the Todd Gurley of the quarterback position.
Devin, we've heard some cash game and some GPP plays. Who do you have, and are you getting cute at all with any of these sort of names impacted by injury?
I am. So Jeff Driskel at home against Denver. Something's going on with this Denver defense. They gave up 462 yards to Ben Roethlisberger last week, 401 yards to Phillip Rivers the week before that. And then other than that, the whole season they've been pretty good, but it's a unit that has improved vastly over the run. And I think what we're seeing is that teams are throwing more against them than they had earlier in the year when they did have some issues running the ball. But Driskel has rushing upside that makes me intrigued at 4,500. I think his realistic scenario is somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 275 yards, 30 to 40 rushing yards. He's ran for a touchdown in each of the 2 games that he's played significantly, so he's not afraid to run it inside the red zone. I think that there is a scenario on DraftKings in cash where you could go Jeff Driskel. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I think that it's we're going to go through this running back list, and almost every guy at the top is in a phenomenal spot. So if you wanted to theoretically load up on running backs, I think that at 4,500, it allows you a lot of flexibility to do that.
Yeah, you're not picking him because you feel great about it. You're picking him because he's just dirt cheap.
And they're going to have to throw, right? So we've talked about the Bengals defense all year about how terrible they are. And I think Case Keenum is a fine GPP play just because the Bengals have allowed 300 yards or 3 touchdowns passing in every game except Baltimore, which they allowed 122 yards to Lamar Jackson rushing. And they held Ryan Tannehill, which it's Ryan Tannehill.
Doesn't even count.
Right, so throw that game out. So 100 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, or 300 yards in every game this season. At Case Keenum, he's not a great quarterback, but this could be a get-right game for a struggling pass offense at the moment. And then the last one I'll just throw out there is I don't think I could do it in cash because of the price, but Jared Goff is pretty intriguing in GPPs. So over the last 3 weeks, this Detroit secondary with Nevin Lawson and Tease Tabor, outside of Darius Slay, they have nothing. So they allowed 355 and 3 to Mitchell Trubisky, 357 and 3 against Cam Newton. And when Cam Newton's throwing for 357 yards, your secondary is pretty trash. So, and then Chase Daniel, he threw for 230 and 2, but that doesn't tell the whole picture. He had a wide open Anthony Miller that he missed by, a yard. That would have been another 40-yard touchdown. So I think that Goff is in a decent spot. It's in a dome, which, I would rather be at home, but, dome's is probably second best if we were going to go there.
Any interest in Kirk Cousins in GPPs going against New England? I see 2 yeses from John and Ryan and a Post-it note drawn by a 4-year-old from Devin. Excellent.
You just can't take everybody.
But you just talked about Jeff Driskel. You're pretty much taking everybody if you're considering him.
Yeah. Shout out Oviedo, Florida.
When he threw 155 yards and a touchdown and a half.
I will admit he looked good last week, but I'm not so quick to dismiss this Denver defense. Based on you said earlier we were selecting stats to.
I 100% agree that I was selecting stats there.
Yeah, you got to adjust.
When you quarterbacks, when
you get to 430 yards passing, that's like a pretty.
You're right, but he threw 56 times in that game.
Ryan's talking about the exact same guys in Ben Roethlisberger who threw for 260. I'm talking about 440.
I compared Matt Ryan to Ben Roethlisberger. You compared Jeff Driskel to Ben Roethlisberger.
I'm comparing a $4,500 price.
This is true.
That if you want to load up on running backs, we're going to talk about running backs, and this is a great transition into that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
you could build a cash lineup with, Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, and Todd Gurley. Like, I don't know if you get all three, but you could get pretty darn close.
The only reason to do that is the only way I can get behind that is if you think that Driskel runs the ball 10 times, because he has shown that he can do that. And he scored a couple touchdowns on very limited action this season. But I think that's a real risk. I think that there are better ways to go. The cash game lineup I built before the show had Patrick Mahomes, the most expensive quarterback on the line. And, I found value elsewhere. And we'll talk about where those areas are. And we can start with running back, right, Austin?
Yeah, let's go to running back. I'll kick it to you, John, to talk about running back first, because maybe some of that value that you're talking about in your cash lineup, maybe you found a running back along the way.
So just go ahead and grab it.
Please don't say it.
Go ahead and grab it, Devin. So Devin,
I don't even know where this is going.
All the reasons that you should not consider Carlos Hyde this week. And I think in cash at 3,300, there's no reason that you should not be considering him on DraftKings. Now, on FanDuel, I think it's a different story. But on DraftKings at 3,300, he's going to touch the ball, at least a dozen times? Can I get a yes on this?
Maybe. What if they're getting blown out? Is TJ Yeldon not in the game?
If they fall behind 14-0 in the first quarter, he'll touch the ball 5.
Just for the record, for our audio listeners, both Devin and Ryan were quick to flash up the red black-eyed Joes on this.
I'd rather play Jeff Driskel.
Carlos Hyde stuff.
You got to be out of your mind.
No, I'm serious. Carlos Hyde is a trap, man.
Can we make a bet that Jeff Driskel pays off his salary more than Carlos Hyde?
Yes. What are the stakes?
I'll give you 2-1 odds.
This makes great radio and audio here.
All right.
Well,
I had to think of a good bet, but
we'll come up with stakes later, and we'll tweet them out or put them in the comments.
Yeah.
We'll do it after the show.
If Devin loses, he has to buy more dog pillows for John's background.
There's another one that I haven't.
All right, let's talk about running backs.
Yeah. Keep going. Next one. John.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm in disagreement with these guys. For the record, I think that Carlos Hyde is a cash game play this week at 3,300. I think he gets 12 to 15 touches at a minimum, and he's going up against a defense that does not scare me in Indianapolis at home. On the upper end, I think Christian McCaffrey is probably the class cash game play at 8,800. They're throwing the ball to him. He's doing basically wide receiver 1, running back 1 type work. 25 touches a game. He's the guy you wanted 8,800, and then kind of in between. And I suspect both of the guys are going to like this. That's Aaron Jones against Arizona. Arizona's been dreadful all season against running backs. He's 6,700. That's kind of the trifecta that I have in cash games. And I'll hand it off to you guys to fill in with all your chalk.
Yeah, so just real quick about Aaron Jones. Arizona's allowed 100 yards or less just twice this season, so I completely agree with that. And then McCaffrey, I think he's the solidified chalk. Over the last 6 weeks, they've allowed 9 touchdowns and 5.33 yards per carry. Ryan, go ahead with what you had, and then I'll jump back in.
Yeah, I kind of have somebody in the middle of this top tier and Carlos Hyde. And that guy, that person, is Phillip Lindsay, actually, for the Broncos. So shout out to Devin on the rushing matchups, saying that Cincinnati is terrible, because they are. But they're terrible.
That was real hard. Like
they're
hashtag analysis.
Are we doing Lindsay in cash, though? Can we talk about that?
I'm actually thinking yes right now. I'm leaning that way. Like I said, I'd rather pay down at quarterback and then have Lindsay instead of somebody like Hyde. But
so John is saying no, and Devin is making a noise like he's not convinced.
Here's the problem. So over the last 3 games, their opponents allowed 153 yards and 1.7 touchdowns. The issue I have with Lindsay, he's getting 12.5 carries a game.
Yep.
And he's averaging 94 yards a game, but is that sustainable? It might be for one more week. Like,
I mean,
it very well could be.
So Denver as a team is not carrying the ball very much. I would argue that against Cincinnati, there's a story to be told that they carry the ball a lot more, and he's getting the lion's share of those carries. And if they do fall behind, or if it does even stay neutral, he's also the best pass catcher in that backfield. He looked very impressive last week. He had 11 outcarried Royce Freeman 11-7 2 weeks ago and 14-6 last week. And the yards last week were 110 for Lindsay and 17 for Freeman on the 6.
Yeah, Royce Freeman's not good. Like,
this guy is taking over the backfield. This is a team that has new life. It's a team that is playing for a playoff spot. Their schedule stinks the whole way in. They have a chance to make the playoffs. They're going to play their best guy. And this is a defense. Since week 6, when the Bengals played the Steelers and effectively ended their season, they've allowed 84 rushing yards to at least one running back in all 6 games. Only one of those guys needed 20 carries to even get his 84 yards. And they've allowed 9 rushing touchdowns and 11 total touchdowns to running backs in those 6 games. The matchup's great, and I think Lindsay's a guy who's going to play no matter what the game script is.
I don't know that I agree with all of that. Number one, this is one of the away favorite games I talked about leading in.
Point.
I think that Denver's not a good team. Can we agree on that? I don't think they're a good team, and they're going on the road.
I don't think they're a bad team.
I think they're better than Cincinnati.
Oh,
Yeah.
No dispute there. Cincinnati's not a good team either, but Cincinnati's playing at home. This is a spot where I think they could get a little sloppy. And I'm not sure I agree that Phillip Lindsay is game script proof.
Do you know who's running the Bengals defense?
Hugh Jackson, is it not?
Your best friend.
An offensive guy who's been a horrible offensive guy his entire career is now running the Bengals defense. It's the worst in the league.
What could go wrong?
We're talking about how bad the defense is from a running perspective, but they're not very good against the pass either, if we're being quite honest. This team could very well move the ball through the air and really not have to use Lindsay as much as we're suggesting. I'm not suggesting here that Lindsay is a bad play per se. I'm saying I don't think that he's a lock cash game play.
And maybe that's because there are a lot of good cash game options this week too.
I think you can do it on DraftKings Cash. I don't think there's any way I can do it on FanDuel.
Yep.
I don't think it's a lock, but I think he's in play.
Yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. Ryan, you got any other guys before I kick it over to Devin to wrap us up?
Not for cash, but for GPP, just the anti-Carlos Hyde play. I don't mind TJ Yeldon. I mean, if this game gets out of hand for a team that's already given up, especially on DraftKings where it's full PPR, Yeldon's the pass-catching guy. He could be on the field a lot with a quarterback who probably isn't going to push the ball downfield very much. So
That was GPP, right?
Yes.
So I want to add to that. I think that's an excellent GPP play this week as leverage. I actually think that Carlos Hyde's going to get between 35 and 40% on DraftKings. And as much as I think he's cash game viable, he's going to. I don't care what you say. He's going to be.
No. I'm disagreeing with people.
The public.
Yeah.
That is so hilariously bad.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
That makes TJ Yeldon very attractive for all the reasons you guys have poo-pooed Hyde. I think that there's a real reason to say that TJ Yeldon is a class GPP play because he's going to be huge leverage against all of those Hyde owners.
All right, Devin, bring us home on running back. You have some other guys you
I
like.
have a lot of guys.
Tell us your favorites.
No, I'm gonna go with like 3. Lamar Miller is a great GPP play this week, particularly on DraftKings at 4,600 at home against Cleveland. Cleveland's allowed 4 running backs to go for 130 yards or more, and 5 running backs to score 2 touchdowns or more. Outside of Myles Garrett, their defensive line is horrific. I mean, Trevin Coley and Emmanuel Ogbah have really struggled. Lamar Miller has been one of the backbones of this offense. Sort of fluky in the sense that he's relying on some longer touchdowns to get the job done. But I think that against this Browns defense, it's not unreasonable that he could pay off that 4,600 price.
Are you worried about Alfred Blue there, though? Because I was looking at that pretty carefully earlier, and Alfred Blue seems to be getting more and more involved in that offense, and Miller's touch count seems to be trending downward, despite what you just said. I mean, the big 90-yard run or whatever he had last week, that really saved his fantasy day. That's the part.
Well, he's still 11 for 70 on his other carries. So, or 11 for 65. So it's not – the touches are a concern. They're very similar to Phillip Lindsay in the same sense.
It's a great matchup. I agree. I just wondered whether you thought Alfred Blue getting 40% of the snaps at this point is eating into that too much.
The majority of the Blue touches were in the second half of a game that they were leading pretty handily. So there's
they won by what, 17?
They did. They were up by, it looks like 14 very early.
They're up 24 to 10 at half.
Yeah, 20.
I look at it as this. So I will try to find the extra 1,100 to go, or what is it, 1,300?
1,300, yeah.
To go from Carlos Hyde to Lamar Miller in GPPs. I mean, if it's 30 to 35%, Carlos Hyde does not look like the same running back. And in cash, if everyone is on him, fine, because I think he will be highly owned. Yeah. But in GPPs, what's his real upside?
I don't disagree with that. I think
you're hoping for a touchdown.
You're 100% correct on that. I'm not debating that. I'm talking more along the lines of, of Blue. And just for the record, that I heard that somewhere earlier that a lot of his touches were in the second half last week. It was 6 in the first half and 8 in the second half. It wasn't that much of a discrepancy between halves.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm not that concerned. I think he'll get 12 to 15 touches. Is it a concern? Sure. But in a GPP, I'm not playing Lamar Miller in cash, but in a GPP, why not? Kareem Hunt's in a really good matchup, but the problem is, very similarly, his carries have fallen off the face of the earth over the last 6 games. He has 14.7 carries over the last 6 games, where he was touching the ball 20 times a game earlier this season. So I don't know. John, do you have a strong take on Hunt?
If they're up 15 points, they look like they're coasting into the playoffs. I could see them getting away from him and maybe feeding Spencer Ware a little bit. I don't think that I'm going to have a lot of him in GPP formats because he's the 4th highest rostered running back on the board at 19%. And we've seen it already. The Chiefs spread the ball around. It can be anybody this week. So I don't think that he's worth 20% rostership this week.
And then 2 more. Sorry, Austin. Gus Edwards, I think, is at least in play. He's dealing with an ankle injury. He's 4,800 on DraftKings, which is still cheap for a guy that's gone over 100 yards in the last 2 games. Atlanta has struggled against running backs all year, allowing 5.0 yards per carry and 6.3 over the last 3 weeks, sorry. And still won't have Deion Jones. So I think that Edwards, if he looks like he's healthy and he looks like he's ready to go, I need to talk to David because our projections are simply too low on that. And then the last guy on FanDuel specifically is Matt Breida against Seattle. Seattle's allowed a running back to run for 100 yards or more in 3 of the last 4. So at 6,400, I think Breida is in a really good spot. It's on the road, which is a little bit concerning. But we just named off 13 running backs. Like, there's a ton of guys this week that are all in great spots. So, for me, McCaffrey is a lock in cash. I think you should go Aaron Jones, and then, pick one of Hyde if you don't want to go Driskel and you want to go up to Mahomes. I'm fine with that. Lindsay, Breida, Edwards if he's healthy. Like, there's a number of different options, but I'm playing 3 running backs this week. I don't even want to consider playing four wide receivers.
And before we move on, I think, for those of you who play a lot of tournaments on, DraftKings and FanDuel now for that matter, because of the wealth of the depth of wealth here at the running back position, you really should be considering filling that flex position with the running back this week, because I think that's where it's most deep this particular week.
Yeah, it's just one of those weeks. Let's move on to wide receivers. There's a lot of injuries here that we're keeping an eye on, including some cornerback injuries. It looks like A.J. Green is going to return this week against Denver. He hasn't played since week 8. Looks like Sammy Watkins probably won't play this week. He didn't practice on Thursday. To a lesser degree, Danny Amendola didn't practice Thursday. Maybe that's a bump for Kenny Stills. Stephon Diggs didn't practice on Thursday. He swears he's going to play this week. We keep an eye on that one. I don't know that Deshaun Jackson's going to be real good to go this week. He's got a thumb injury. He was seen wearing a cast. Maybe this is a bump for the other Tampa Bay receivers. We mentioned Jalen Ramsey. Xavier Rhodes didn't practice on Thursday for Minnesota. That might help out the New England passing game. And then it looks like Aqib Talib is going to return from IR, but might be on a limited snap count against Detroit. So, Devin, let's go to you first on wide receivers. Any of these situations draw DFS interest for you, or do you have some other pass catchers you want to play this week?
Yeah, not really.
That's fine.
No, not really.
Devin said no to something?
I think my favorite guy this week is Emmanuel Sanders at 6,300 on DraftKings. I talked about Keenum earlier in the show, but I really think that – I know they're a road favorite, but I really think that Denver comes out and they're playing for a lot, where I think that this Cincinnati team is spiraling a little bit out of control at the moment. The bringing of Hugh Jackson is pretty funny, that he's running their defense. And then, you know, at the top, I kind of like – I don't know. I think that it could be a week where Aaron Rodgers comes out and throws for 305 touchdowns. He's been talking a lot about the media, and, you know, it's against Arizona, so they can basically name their score. Is it as a stack, and it's an early stack, but I do think Devontae Adams at 7,900 is a little bit too cheap on DraftKings when comparing him up to, you know, some of it. He's not cheap, but I think he has 2 touchdown upside. So Tyreek Hill I would love to play, but there's no way I'm playing him at 9,100. I don't know. I don't like anything at the top this week. Sanders is like the highest that I'm going to go.
What about Nuke Hopkins at 8,200?
Thought about it, and Deshaun Watson worries me. I did a little piece on our passing matchups, and he's averaging since he got injured in Baltimore or Buffalo. Was that a month and a half ago with the lung where he couldn't fly?
Oh yeah.
He's averaging like 197 passing yards a week, and Hopkins is drawing Denzel Ward for most of the game. So that's – and TJ Carey's going to shadow Thomas. I don't know. I think –
He's got 6 touchdowns since that game, for what it's worth. I mean,
Hopkins does, yes. Yeah, for sure. But does he have the huge potential? You're hoping for 2 touchdowns.
I'm talking cash here. I mean, I think, you know, it probably we talked about a lot of running backs, and because we talked about a lot of running backs in cash, we probably have to say what are the high tight end or wide receivers that we're looking at, and what are the low guys where we're saving salary so you can slot in guys like CMC and Gurley. And at the high ends, for me, in cash, it's Nuke Hopkins. I might agree with you that his upside is limited because of Watson.
Can you afford it, though? Like, isn't he just a price where you just – if you want to go Jones, you want to go McCaffrey, and you want to go Mahomes, you're kind of stuck that – and maybe you're not. Maybe you have some cheap receivers that you can fit him in.
No, I mean, but I think that's where we're talking, and the people who are listening are hearing some of this. We need to define at the top end and the low end on each of these positions. I can tell you my wide receivers are ranging anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 in my cash game, and so I'm not going as high as Nuke Hopkins, but I'm saving money with Carlos Hyde, and at the tight end position we'll talk about in just a few.
Okay. Yeah. So 2 more guys real quick that I just want to mention. Adam Humphries at 4,200 is a pretty solid way to save salary. John had a great call several weeks back where he mentioned that his connection with Winston is much better than Fitzpatrick. He's since scored a touchdown in 2 straight games, so good call there, John. And DJ Moore is really intriguing if Devin Funchess misses. Even if Funchess plays, I think that Moore is gaining more and more share. See what I did there?
More and more, you might say.
Yeah. At 5,600 on DraftKings, and what is he on FanDuel? 6,400 on FanDuel is a pretty good price. So that's kind of where I'm at.
You mentioned it at the top of your receiver take Tyreek Hill is just crazy expensive over on DraftKings. And he's expensive on FanDuel, but if you're going to play him this week, FanDuel is probably the site to play him on just because he's so expensive on DraftKings. John, talk about some receivers.
So I agree with the Emmanuel Sanders cash game take. I told you about Nuke Hopkins. I think Kenny Golladay looks good against the Rams. You got to think that these Lions are going to be throwing the ball quite a bit, and the Lions are going to be throwing the ball in a pass-heavy game script, chasing the Rams. I know we talked a little bit about Aqib Talib coming back. I'll tell you, moving forward, we're in week 13 now, week 14, week 15, week 16. It's not going to be as easy to pick receivers against the Rams despite the game script, because earlier in the season they were good when they had Marcus Peters and Aqib Talib. But when Talib went out, to kind of open things up for their opponents. But I think this week, as Austin led off the top of this segment with, we're going to see him on a limited snap count after missing about 2 months of football. So with that in mind, I think Kenny Golladay, who is a future star in this league, he's 6,700. I like him because I think they'll be extremely pass heavy, and I think he's cash and GPP viable. Brandon Cooks is borderline. He's kind of the last guy I added to my cash game list. He's not typically a guy I would, because he's a big play guy rather than a volume guy. But I do think that they're going to have issues covering him this week. I believe that Devin talked about how bad Detroit has been in coverage against the pass earlier in the show, and Cooks is $7,000, and he, I think, since Cooper Kupp has gone out, has 12 targets in both of those games. So he's definitely seen an uptick in usage in that amount of time. So transitioning over to GPPs. Last week we saw Chase Daniel at quarterback for the first time, and he favored one receiver, and it was Taylor Gabriel. And I'm not a Taylor Gabriel fan, so if I'm talking about him, you should probably pay attention. He's only 4,200 against the Giants, and the Giants have not been good on the outside this year. I think that this is a situation where Gabriel could pay off salary in one fell swoop at one play at 4,200. So I got a few other guys, but I want to save them for stacks, so I'll hand it off here.
Real quick about Chase Daniel. So 2.55 seconds was the amount of time that he took to throw the ball, which is the faster than any quarterback in the league's average. So Drew Brees at 2.58. Essentially what they're doing is they're running crossing routes with Tariq Cohen and Taylor Gabriel and just telling him to get the ball out of your hands.
Yep.
And Emmanuel Sanders was mentioned earlier by Devin. Just keep an eye on his health. It seems
he's
like
fine.
You're thinking he's fine. I mean, he was added to the injury report on Thursday, but maybe it was just like a little rest day on Thursday. Ryan, wrap us up on receivers here.
Yeah, so interesting that we talked top, middle, bottom of pricing. Nobody mentioned Adam Thielen. I mean, the guy's a target machine. He's in on a pass heavy team against a pass heavy defense. Minnesota's fast. New England is fast. We talked earlier about play volume, so there will be a lot of it in that game as well. So Thielen's a guy at the top who I like, and if Diggs is out, I mean, I don't know how many more targets Thielen can get, but I don't think it'll be any fewer targets if Stephon Diggs cannot play, or if Stephon Diggs is limited, which anytime Stephon Diggs is even remotely injured, he's always limited.
Diggs has been on fire.
Diggs has been? Is that what you said? Yeah. No, they're both phenomenal players, and you could play either of them in any given week because all the targets go to those guys.
I think I prefer both over Hopkins, but –
yeah, I don't disagree. I had Thielen on top over Hopkins, and then I also had Cooks. I also had Golladay. I'm trying to see who else I had written down here. Just if you really need to go, super cheap, and this is far from a cash game play, but you could make an argument that Chris Conley, especially on FanDuel, he's 4,500 with Sammy Watkins out. I mean, if you want any piece of the Chiefs, that's the cheapest viable one. What else did I have written down? You know what? Like John, I'll save the rest for stacks.
Any love for Marcel Aitman?
Oh, you son of a something. Yeah, I love him this week. He's my sneaky stack. Maybe not a stack because I don't love Derek Carr, but I think Marcel Aitman is a really good GPP play this week. He has been targeted, I think, more than anybody since he started playing a few weeks ago. I'm trying to pull it up on the fly. Last week, three catches for only 16 yards. The week prior, 4 catches for 50 yards. There's not a whole lot to love in this Oakland wide receiving core. We've seen Jordy Nelson disappoint all season long. Seth Roberts is Seth Roberts. He's going to catch 4 passes for 40 yards every week. Maybe he gets a touchdown. And Jared Cook has been outperforming himself with touchdowns in each of the past 2 weeks. I think Gateman gets into the end zone this week, and he's $3,600, I believe, if I'm not $3,600 against the Chiefs. And we've already talked about that point spread. It's 15 points. Derek Carr may have to throw the ball 40-plus times in this game. I really like him. So Devin stole my thunder on that. I was saving him for later.
15 targets since week 11, which is the highest on the team. The next closest guy is the aforementioned Seth Roberts with 9.
We just made his percent rostered go up from I think it's 2% right now. It'll go up to 3.5% at least.
One more guy to throw out there who's cheap, and he had a ton of buzz about him as a GPP play a few weeks ago and even up until last week. But Cortland Sutton, we talked about the Bengals defense and how bad it is. This could be a game where they're trying to get him more involved. Vance Joseph called him out in the post game last week and basically said, look, even though he's a rookie, he needs to play better. And if you're into those types of narratives, they should be able to throw however they want against this team. So it's intriguing that he has big play potential, and he's 4,200 on DraftKings, and what is he on FanDuel? I would assume pretty cheap, but he is 5,400. So
4,200 DraftKings, Humphries, Gabriel, or Sutton?
Humphries and cash.
Because we mentioned all 3, so people are going to want to know.
Yep.
Humphries and cash, Sutton and GPPs, and then Gabriel. Gabriel just doesn't – I don't know. I like Gabriel and Humphries and cash. I prefer Humphries a little bit more.
Okay.
Cool. All right.
I would agree that Humphries is probably the cash game play if you're going that low. I'm not sure I want to. I think if we find out tomorrow, we record Thursday night, Friday, if we find out that Sammy Watkins doesn't practice, I think I would drop down another 600 or 400 and grab Chris Conley as a cash game play over those two. And
don't play Jarvis Landry, please. I see it in cash every single week. Stop.
All right. On that note, let's move to tight ends. We're running a little bit behind here, guys. The only guy I have on my list is Jack Doyle, sent to injured reserve with a kidney injury.
Jeff Hireman's out for the season, too.
Gotcha. And then, so that's going to make Eric Ebron a popular play this week. Let's talk tight ends. Ryan, hit me with some tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, Ebron is the cash chalk. We all know how many touchdowns he's been getting recently, and his snap count's going to go up. We saw what he did without Doyle earlier in the year. But the other guy, and Devin alluded to it, if you're going to punt, if you're going to go value, site minimum 2,500 DraftKings is Matt LaCosse for Denver. I feel like we've recommended everybody on Denver, so it's getting a little bit saturated. But the cheapest piece of the offense is LaCosse. Had multiple targets last week, even before Hireman went out, scored a touchdown in the game against the Steelers. I think Denver tight ends ran north of 30 routes in the game if you combine Hireman and LaCosse. So it's a position that they utilize. So Cincinnati is, again, hashtag bad at everything. So they are 32nd, which is dead last in tight end fantasy points allowed, 21st in normalized strength of schedule. So they're not
and 32nd in coach.
32nd in defensive coaching. They might even be 40th now in defensive coaching. Nice. And then one GPP shot that I have is, I have 2, but I'll go with one. Travis Kelce. Oakland allows the 3rd highest percentage of total passing yards to tight ends, and Kansas City gains the 5th highest percentage of total passing yards via tight ends, and their passing percentage pie is quite a large one. So he's very high priced. It's the GPP play because the roster construction won't really allow it if you feel safe about your lineup, but huge upside as usual.
Right on. Devin, tight ends.
Yeah, I think Cameron Brate's at least intriguing. Scored a touchdown last week, and the price jumped pretty significantly, but Carolina's really struggled against tight ends from time to time. And I think on the other side of the ball, Greg Olsen is intriguing. But I think in cash, it's probably Ebron and Matt LaCosse. I don't know what to do with Trey Burton. The guy just isn't involved in the offense, and the Giants have really struggled against tight ends from time to time. And we've talked about Alec Ogletree about 4,000 times on this show, and I'm not going to do it again. But Burton has upside, but the price just hasn't come down enough to really consider him.
John, what do you think about those tight end picks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on board. I think it's very rare on this show we have a consensus, but I think we have a consensus on the cash game options, at least on DraftKings. Maybe after I'm done, send it back to Devin to pick a FanDuel, since he plays there a lot more than I do. But we need a cash game tight end on FanDuel, Devin. But it's
Ebron.
Say again?
It's still Eric Ebron.
It's Ebron at 5,600.
At 5,600, yeah, I think that's pretty cheap. It's Matt LaCosse. I think on DraftKings, I'm a big fan of punting the position if I can, and he's 2,500, which is the site minimum. If he catches 3 passes, I really don't care how much yardage he gets. That's good enough, and I'd rather spend up elsewhere, because tight end is such a volatile position. It's just how I do my cash games in general. So even though Eric Ebron looks like a great play at 4,200, I wouldn't dispute it. If you have the extra cash, go ahead and do it. I'm rolling with Matt LaCosse at 2,500. For GPPs, Kelsey is an obvious play this week. We're in the Christmas season now, so it's time to talk about Rudolph. Kyle Rudolph, right?
Gotta always make a Rudolph joke. It's Christmas.
I have to.
Notice how Austin perked up. He's stressing about time, and he perked up when we made a Christmas joke.
Over the past 3 years, Kyle Rudolph has 5, 7, and 8 touchdowns. I don't know what the average there is, but it's pretty close to 6, I think. This year, he's been playing with wide receivers who are playing out of their mind, as we talked about earlier in the show. Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs have been extremely efficient, and there's no reason to think that they won't continue to be somewhat efficient. But there is some positive scoring regression coming to Kyle Rudolph. He is still a part of this offense. He's 3,600. I don't think he's scored since week 2. And he's only got 2 touchdowns this season. I think he finishes with 4 or 5 on this offense. This is a game where they're playing New England. I think on Austin's normalized strength of schedule tool over the course of the season, New England has been very, very friendly to the tight end position.
Dead last.
This is a good spot to get some exposure to Kyle Rudolph. I'm just looking over my computer now to see where Steve Buzzard has his projected roster percentage. He's at 2%. This is a good week to be contrarian, get some Rudolph into your life. He's going to be in your life for the next 3 weeks anyhow, but do it this week in a prime matchup.
Nice. I want to get a cash defense and a GPP defense from each of you guys. Devin, who you got?
Cleveland Browns at 3,200.
That's your cash?
It's both.
Both. Okay, right on.
3,200 on FanDuel, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
2,300 on DraftKings.
Cool. John, who you got?
Cash, I like the Packers, 2,800 at home against Arizona against a rookie quarterback. And then in GPPs, should I do it?
Yes. No.
I don't know. I'm going to do it. What the heck? The Cincinnati Bengals, 2,200 against Denver at home.
Oh, one of those road favorite traps. If you're going to pick a road favorite trap, you can paint the narrative in GPPs.
I think the Bengals win this game this weekend. Yes.
Very bold take, not very convincing. Ryan.
Well, 2,200 at home against Case Keenum. You don't get that too often. So
that's right.
So Packers were my cash, but the other side of the Cincy Denver game, since this is apparently a Denver show tonight.
You're betting on Hugh Jackson?
The Bengals, no, I'm saying Denver for me. The Bengals are missing Cordy Glenn and Jake Fisher off their offensive line. They signed Andre Smith off the street today. That team is in shambles, and we know Denver can get after the passer. We have Jeff Driskel in his first career start, so that sounds pretty tasty.
Nice. All right, we're going to move to one of our favorite segments, the stacks segment. John teased his stacks earlier. We're going to go back to him first.
Yeah, I mean, I have Cousins to Thielen, so we talked about that one. That's one that's been covered. I think I'm going to steal one. I took a sneak peek at trend spotting earlier today. I was looking for something else, and I stumbled upon Ryan's column. I'm going to steal one from you. I read it every week, but I just don't read it before I write my own article, if that makes you feel any better.
Okay. It sounds like I was stumbling through a dark alley. I took a weird wrong turn.
Yeah. I ended up in Hesterland, which was really not good for me. But I think we're going to be in agreement here. I do like Matt Ryan for what it's worth in GPPs, and I think that a decent pairing partner this week is Austin Hooper against Baltimore. So I think that's a sneaky stack this week. And then the last one I'll give you, I don't think we mentioned this at all, and I'm gonna go for the trifecta with Buzzard and mention him one more time tonight. Mike Evans, 8% against Carolina. How about Jameis Winston? We talked about him as a cash game quarterback. They've got one of the higher team totals on the entire slate. They're at 26 points currently. How about pairing up Jameis Winston and Mike Evans? That seems to have worked a few times in our DFS careers. So that's one I'll take at low ownership and hope for them to deliver.
Yeah, it looked like Ryan agreed with some of your picks there. We're going to come to him last, so he has time to recover from you stealing all of his picks. Devin, who you stacking?
Jeff Driskel and Tyler Boyd. So I think that AJ Green will draw some coverage off of Boyd, or off of Green. AJ Green will draw coverage off of Boyd.
Yes.
And we've seen upside from Boyd earlier this season. There's more of a familiarity with Boyd as they've played together a little bit more than he has with Green. And the other stack that I like this week is Jameis Winston with Adam Humphries. I think he gets in the end zone. I think that I do like the Evans call, but I think that Humphries is one of my favorite plays of the week.
Nice. Okay, Ryan, who you got?
Yeah, I had Winston and Evans. I don't mind, maybe not. I'm not saying to triple stack these guys, but I don't mind sprinkling Deshaun Jackson in either if we see that he's healthy with the thumb issue. Evans and Jackson over the last 5 weeks both are top 10 in average depth of target in terms of receivers getting any semblance of volume, 10 targets or more in the last 5 weeks. So, and Carolina allows the 6th most deep passes against per game, and Tampa throws it deep more than anybody in the league per game. So I like those guys. Humphries has done a great job, but I think this might be a deep pass week for Tampa. I alluded to it earlier. Oh, a red one from Austin. Look out. Hold on a second. I'm going to blow through these other ones real quick since I hinted at them, and I want to hear how you disagree with me.
Sure.
It wouldn't be Power Grid if I didn't say Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. I do like Hooper a little bit too, but the volume with Jones, the guy's gone over 100 yards. I think it's a handful of games in a row. He's trending for 1,800 yards this year, which would be second in NFL history, I think. So, it's a DraftKings play based on price and based on scoring. But I do like Julio Jones again this week, and I think you'll get him low owned just like with Matt Ryan. And then Andrew Luck, T.Y. Hilton. I think Indy wins that game. Jacksonville has given up. So, again, it's GPP play when you're starting to sort of guess on game script, but that's what I'm doing there. And Austin, what's your beef, man?
Well, I just got Power Grid bingo by you mentioning Julio Jones, so I appreciate that. My concern with Deshaun Jackson, you kind of briefly mentioned him, is that he's got kind of this thumb injury where he might play, but I don't know that he's going to be spectacular at catching it. I mean, I think Jimmy Graham played through a similar injury last week, but it's a little different, tight end, shorter passes, and Deshaun Jackson.
It's easier to catch a high lofting ball 50 yards downfield with nobody next to you.
Maybe that's true. Just keep it a little bit eye on Deshaun.
No, you're right. And if he's out, I like Evans even more. So.
Yeah. I think, there's more love for the Evans-Humphries situation here from me. All right, let's talk about our parting thoughts. Words of wisdom, last players you didn't get a chance to mention. John, any other like articles you want to mention or features that are going on? What do you got, John?
I'm going to go back to where I started. Beware the road favorites. This week we've got 6 of them. The ones I'm most concerned are at the lower end. Indianapolis, if you're rostering Marlon Mack and thinking you're going to have a great spot there, remember it's in Jacksonville against a defense that really hasn't done a whole lot, but they do have potential. Going down a bit, Phillip Lindsay, I talked about him earlier. I think this is potentially a bad spot for him. And then lastly, of course, I can't find it on Chicago. Chicago's an away favorite against the Giants. I don't know that anybody's talking about Jordan Howard, but maybe this isn't a great spot for Tariq Cohen if you were thinking about him.
Devin, parting thoughts?
I think we pretty much covered it.
Excellent. Ryan, parting thoughts?
Yeah, when we had David Dodge join us a couple weeks ago subbing in, he mentioned, beware of teams that are sort of not playing for anything. So both beware of and exploit teams that aren't playing for anything. So it's not necessarily a great conservative cash game strategy to go ahead and guess what teams' motivations are. But at this point in the season, it becomes a little more transparent with teams that had high expectations, perhaps not living up to those, not playing well. I mean, Jacksonville's going to Cody Kessler. Yeah. And then also we want to focus on teams who are trying to win and who know where they're going. I mean, you have teams like Carolina, who was in a must-win last week and fed Christian McCaffrey all he can handle. I'd expect them to continue that. Seattle, same game. They were in a must-win mode, and Chris Carson has regained that job for like the 3rd time this year. So teams that are trying to win, where we know where their targets and touches are going, that we really need to pay extra attention to this time of year.
Yep, I like that advice. It's definitely that time. That's all we've got for our show. For our latest DFS content, visit footballguys.com. We'll be back next Friday morning with our Week 14 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester, I am Austin Lee, saying thank you for watching, and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.